Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss the return of Envy to Counter-Strike Global Offensive in the form of a North American lineup. Obviously, they had dropped their French lineup back in June, so it's been several months that they've been out of the game. They've come back by picking up the core three of what was boxr, and then before that Splice, which is of course Simphis, Cutler, and Drone, and they've brought in Nifty to be the in-game leader, who was of course formerly the leader for quite some time for Renegades, as well as their primary opper. And then they picked up another primary opper who has been out of the mix for quite some time. It's JDM, who hasn't really competed since probably January or February or something like that of 2018. So he's been pretty inactive over the last 7 to 8 months, at least as far as official competition. May have certainly been playing, FPL or other pugs and streaming and maybe, keeping this form up or what have you, but we haven't seen him play really any official matches in quite some time. And so this is the five that Envy will be using to come back into professional Counter-Strike. And obviously, this was not received as some crazy cool announcement by many people. A lot of people thought that this was a pretty lackluster lineup, given that there just didn't seem to be that many star names, particularly for a name like Envy, who is, an organization that had been at the top of their French teams for a lot of CSGO's history up until, really this year, maybe into late last year. This definitely seemed a little bit underwhelming, and with that in mind, though, I think a lot of people were quick to pick up on probably why this made some sense, because you needed the core three of Simphis, Cutler, and Drone to keep the EPL spot, to have a spot in one of the professional leagues. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen with them with ECS. I think they're involved in that. I can't remember if they've done anything in the Challengers Cup or something to get back into ECS, but they weren't in it last season, and they don't really seem to really have much going on outside of EPL for now, unless they can start winning some qualifiers, some events, which they haven't really been able to do in a very long time. So I figured I just kind of wanted to break this down a little bit, and we'll start by talking about the core three of Simphis, Cutler, and Drone, who again have been playing underneath the boxr banner most recently, as well as just, formerly as Splice. This is a team that have had their struggles recently, right? I mean, in the Americas Minor qualifier, they were involved in some weird tie situations. That's more a knock against the format of the minor than maybe boxr themselves. They did have, a win against Pioneers and Swole Patrol, but they had losses to Team One and Luminosity as well as Ghost. So weren't able to make it to the Americas Minor. Again, some of that due to format, but again, some of it due to the fact they weren't able to get any wins over three of the teams they played against, getting knocked out 0-2 by Team 1 Luminosity and Ghost. Prior to that, they were trying to qualify for the Zotac event, but weren't able to do so, losing to the Freedom 35 team, which is kind of some Mountain Dew League players, some good players. I mean, like guy like Food has been kind of looking pretty decent lately, and then they have some other young guys like Tens, and then Toy is a guy that people remember. He had certainly played professionally a little bit in the North American region, so some decent individuals, but still, you feel like if you're going to be a professional level team that you probably should be able to maybe challenge for a spot there, but weren't able to do so. Obviously, past those most recent qualifiers they did play in the last season of EPL, they were ranked way towards the bottom. I think they were second to last. They were ranked 11th. The only person worse than them was Dignitas. But again, they took care of business in the relegation, being able to beat out Swole Patrol in a couple of best of threes that they're losing to Complexity, and one to keep the EPL spot, which again is probably the most valuable thing about this lineup, and probably one of the things that made this team attractive to Envious to pick up, to at least make sure they would get into one pro league. Outside of that, again, there's a team that has really struggled to do much against any of the middle of the pack of North America. Anytime they went up against like a Swole Patrol and like a Star Ladder qualifier, or, against a Complexity and like a DreamHack qualifier, or even whenever they tried to qualify for Sydney and Marseille, they're losing to teams like Team One and Luminosity. They really just weren't beating anybody. I mean, they might occasionally get a map against a Luminosity in a series, or maybe get a map against a Team One in a series, or, maybe they'd get a map against like a Renegades, like way back at the very beginning of the year when they were playing for the Katowice qualifier. They did beat Complexity in the best of three in the Katowice qualifier at the very beginning of the year, but of course that was, through different roster changes being involved in that. In fact, I think when you go out to the Katowice qualifier, that was before Cutler was even on the team. That's back when they still had Exotic and Roka and stuff like that. So you're going way far back. And again, it just seems like they were never really getting very many wins, man. I mean, when they did get wins, again, it was like maybe against Swole Patrol, maybe against like a Blackout, some type of Mountain Dew League level teams. But really, this team would hope, I would imagine, to be a playoff contender for some of the pro leagues, or be able to make it to a DreamHack Open, or make it to some tournaments. And if you're constantly getting beat out by the likes of like a Rogue or Luminosity, usually Complexity's beating them, even Swole Patrol, they has been able to beat them at times. you know, you're not really challenging in the middle of the pack anymore. I mean, here's the deal. Like, if you look at the North American landscape right now for professional leagues or qualifiers for tournaments, very clearly it's a Team Liquid at the top with an Energy and a Made in Brazil, probably. Though I'm not sure that Made in Brazil is even competing in this next season of EPL. I think they've probably forfeited that spot, and I think they're still competing, perhaps, to get into the ECS. I'm not 100% sure on that. I've kind of lost track of what Made in Brazil is doing in pro leagues. So I'm pretty sure that that INTS team, the Brazilian team that has like Phelps and KNG and stuff, took over the SK slot for NA EPL, and so MIBR is just out of it. So I think that's true, but let's forget about Pro League and just think about the totem pole in the region. You know, again, like Liquid, MIBR, Energy, those teams are definitely going to be probably in the top 3 spots. Maybe at some point Cloud9 gets their act together and is able to somewhat challenge in the region, but for right now it doesn't seem that way. But in the meanwhile, you've had teams like Complexity, eUnited, Ghost, Luminosity. These teams have been far more impressive than, you know, the core of this Envy lineup. And Rogue was too, but there is some uncertainty about them with KDN departing, and obviously they need to find an in-game leader, which apparently is supposed to be Crystal, was the rumor. Apparently they were also considering Finesse, so I'm not sure that's eventually going to shake down, but certainly Rogue was another team in the region that was kind of fighting in the middle of the pack. And the middle of the pack of North America at the professional level was actually pretty fucking scrappy. Like, there's been a lot of trading back and forth between teams like eUnited, Rogue, Complexity, Ghost, Luminosity, you know, those types of teams. But again, this team that was formerly boxr, formerly Splice, really wasn't in the mix. They're, again, more towards the bottom end of it all. So, you know, yeah, I can understand why the initial reaction to this lineup is underwhelming. And it really is, because, look, there's a couple of cool pieces here. Like, obviously, Nifty is a really cool piece. We all know what he was able to do with Renegades, you know, being an in-game leader, being a primary opper. It could be a very flashy opper, you know, certainly a guy that could be very exciting, had some cool highlight reel moments, definitely had some good events individually. You know, he's always good in the Asian minors, was pretty good at a couple of big tier 1 events as well. Like, he played really well individually at Cologne, for example, and played pretty well at Katowice, had his moments certainly as well in Sydney. But he's also had his off events, right? Like, he was pretty poor in the last couple of Starlighter events they played at, like the Season 5 and Season 4 finals. He was really poor at those 2 events, particularly the Season 5 finals. And he can sometimes just be hit or miss in general at bigger events. He can certainly excel in smaller events, like, again, the Asian Minor, or when they did really well at that iBuyPower Masters event at the very end of 2017, as well as that, like, SL I-League Invitational for Shanghai. Again, that was more towards the end of 2017 as well. But he can sometimes be a little bit hit or miss. But still, you could see value in him as an in-game leader. I mean, this is a guy that, with Renegades, showed the ability to be able to run a proper default with set rolls and be able to mid-round from that, be able to throw in pace and change it with fast-paced plays. You do wonder how much of that was assisted by Kassad's coaching. Certainly, they seem to speak very highly of him, and when he departed, there was certainly word that it was a little bit of a struggle to adjust to him being gone. So certainly, it's not all him, but, you know, he has proven he does have some chops as an in-game leader. And on this team, he's probably not going to be the primary opper. He's probably going to be more of a rifler in-game leader, which he's shown to be able to use rifles. It's not like he's just a one-trick pony with an AWP. He can rifle, but you do wonder how well he's going to produce when he's a primary rifler and also in-game leading with different support staff behind him. Not to say that the support staff behind him is going to be worse than Kassad. I don't really know. Like, they have like Ely, and they have an assistant coach and out there as well, Taylor, I think. Can't remember if that's his name. I know he's one of the guys that work with boxr, actually, but I don't know much about him as a coach or as an analyst or what have you, so I'm not sure if what he is going to bring to the table in a situation like this. Don't want to speak ill of him, but I just don't know. Like, I'm going to plead ignorance on that one. So there's that. But he can be a good secondary opper for sure. Like, the double op setup of JDM and Nifty could actually probably be a pretty impactful one when you have the money for it in particular maps and situations. But yeah, then you have JDN coming back onto the team, and this guy, you know, is going to be the primary opera of the team, I would have to imagine. This is a guy that, you know, again, hasn't played in a very long time, at least in official matches, so you don't know how rusty he is when it comes to playing in a, you know, organized environment against elite level teams, or even just in league play in general. You know, he certainly had his moments with Liquid where he looked really good, like ECS Season 4 finals. I remember that was being really good for him. He was good in some smaller tournaments like iBuyPower Masters and the America's Minor for E-League Boston back at the end of 2017. Had some big events like at ESG Tour Mykonos, for example, ESL1 Cologne 2017. You know, had his moments at certain events, EPL Season 5 finals, for example. But he also had his shortcomings, like at the E-League Boston Major he played at with Liquid, which granted he was already on his way out the door, so that could have impacted him, but there was still several events where he looked to struggle, like New York, or that first E-League Premier tournament in 2017, or IEM Oakland, or EPL Season 6. You know, it kind of goes on. And look, JDM's also always been known as being a guy that can be a pretty good pure opper, but would struggle when he had rifles in his hand, typically had better stats with pistols and SMGs than like AKs or M4s. And I don't know if that's something he's addressed or not. I mean, I always heard from his teammates that he practiced really hard in DMs with rifles, and they thought from watching him in scrims and in practice and stuff that he could rifle better than maybe he was given credit for. But it just seemed like you never really saw that come through in official matches, because oftentimes he would either just save to make sure he get an op, or the focus of the team was to have the economy to get him AWPs, that you very rarely even saw him in situations where he had to use an AK on a T side or something like that. In fact, I remember there were times where I felt like he bought a UMP or something more often, and maybe I'm just misremembering. This is all anecdotal, and my memory is not usually that good without, you know, notes for reference, but it just felt like you never really saw him have much of an impact with an you know, AK or M4 in his hands. And, you know, you got to wonder how big of a problem that's going to be, because A, that probably sets up your team to have a certain philosophy strategically on how you're going to manage your economy, and B, it just means that in moments when he does have to have a rifle where other operators can still do quite well, when you think about the international landscape, to not him be able to produce there could be a real setback. And again, you just have to wonder about how good he is in general. I mean, I'm sure he's hungry to come back and compete, so that could maybe have some fire under him that's getting him to really practice and really grind the hours and try to get back in shape, but you just never know how it's going to work until you see it play out in front of your eyes. So I'm going to plead ignorance on JDM too, because I just don't know what to expect from him. But when you look at the other players in this team, man, like the core of what was boxr, what was Splyce, I just don't see it. Like, I know Drone's like a young upcoming player. At times he's looked very impressive with Splyce, and you know, when you go back to maybe some of the days when he was playing kind of more like under the pro level, like with Prospects or mostly Harmless or Tectonic, Astral Authority, some of these other teams, like when you go way back in his career, he definitely looked good enough to merit being given an opportunity on a professional team. And certainly his early days with Splyce, when he was playing in Mountain Dew League with Splyce and playing in some different smaller stuff like ECS development and things throughout 2017, yeah, he looked pretty good, but I mean, just not crazy impressive. You know, I would really have to see a lot more from him before I was like, yes, this can be a guy that Envious can rely on alongside JDM's opping and maybe, you know, Nifty's in-game leading, and maybe if he can still show us some poise with the rifle, that yes, this gives them the firepower they need to be competitive against all these other established teams in the middle of the pack of NA throughout this year, which I listed off earlier, that have shown they can qualify for events, or shown that maybe they can show you something really cool in a LAN environment here and there. And you know, like, there isn't really anything here. And then when you look at guys like, you know, like a Cutler or a Simphis, I mean, Cutler's form hasn't been too bad, you know, in recent times with this team, but again, like, I just don't know if you can really rely on him on being a big firepower piece. Maybe he can be like a good supportive element. Sure, I think there's still some value there with his experience and with the fact that he can, you know, at times look really sharp as more of like a passive rifler, not really a focus of the team. And then Simphis, he's kind of like the Swiss Army knife of the North American region. Been that way for a long time. He's shifted roles so often. A guy that can probably help Nifty as an in-game leader, give him ideas. I mean, certainly Simphis has done a lot of in-game leading for this core, you know, throughout their history, being Splyce and boxr, and even at times I think he may have been an in-game leader of TSM, though I think sometimes it may have been Finesse. I think it was mostly him for the majority of TSM, if not all of it, and they had some pretty cool stuff that he was able to do with that team, like the ECS Season 1 finals and a couple other events here and there, and even going back to his Complexity days, he was in-game leading. So he can definitely add ideas, and I think that his rifling is still pretty good. It's just the problem is that it's not like star level rifling. And so if you have him and Cutler and a Drone who isn't really proven yet, then where's my star rifling power? I need somebody to be like a star level player, someone who can carry and put up big numbers with the rifle to really give this team like that flair they need to be competitive. Because sure, let's just think of like a perfect optimistic scenario. Let's say Nifty's a pretty good rifler, in-game leader, decent fragging in-game leader when he's not the primary opper. Let's say JDM comes back in full force with the op and is really strong. That's still not enough, you know, and I just don't think even if Simphis, Cutler, and Drone are good or decent, there still just isn't that star factor there. Again, I think it would have made sense to maybe have one of these guys or something, but I feel like one or two changes would have to happen where some like star riflers come in, or maybe some young guns that look promising that are coming up from MDL or something, before I would think, okay, this team could actually maybe beat out teams like Complexity or other middle of the pack teams to maybe get a playoff spot in an EPL. But right now I see them more towards the bottom end of the middle, or more towards maybe like the last 4 or 5 teams in the league. So I think, like I said, teams like Complexity, Ghost, E United, all these teams look more impressive to me on paper, and I've seen what they can do already as well. Whereas with this team I'm working with nothing, they have no official results yet as a 5. And depending on what Rogue does with their in-game leader situation, I think they still have enough talent to probably, deal with this team as well, from what I've seen. Again, like, you can understand the value in the lineup because it gets you the EPL spot, and at least get you a foundation somewhere to start with. And, Nifty as an in-game leader is probably fine for a team like this, because it's not like there's many other in-game leaders out there in the region. Again, if JDM can return as an opper and still be powerful, still be of value as a primary opper, then that's another good piece to have. But all the rest, I think, is very much up in the air. And, it's kind of one of those things where I feel like they're playing for their spot, for now. Once the team gets established with this lineup and they can start making moves, some of these guys are really going to have to prove their worth to keep their slot, I would imagine. And I don't know that you can keep all of these players. I think eventually you're going to have to make changes if you want to contend. But anyway, that's my thoughts on this whole Envy returning, and kind of my thoughts on the lineup, and we'll see what happens. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Thanks so much.